give me permission. If you want to record it just in case.
Yes, you can see.
And I will give permission. So Bruno, thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Victor. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Lo haré en inglés porque si intento hacerlo en castellano, nos quedamos aquí hasta las 5 de la tarde, ¿vale? Es que cuando empiezo a hablar en castellano, termino en portugués. Entonces, for me, it's easier to do it in English because it's different. But of course, if something is not clear or you miss something, just ask and I'll try to explain in castellano. I also brought a few videos. They are in Brazilian Portuguese. I hope you'll be able to understand. If not, I can try to explain, but I think the context is pretty clear. So thanks, Victor, for the introduction. As Victor said, my name is Bruno. I work at UCL now in London. I've been in the UK since 2015. But before, I was an academic in Brazil. And before that, I used to work at Tectoy, as Victor said. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of games in Brazil. I will try to explain a few things, well, two main things that I think are crucial for you guys to understand the history of games in Brazil and to some extent in Latin America and in many other parts of the world. And also talk a little bit about the history of Tectoy and this work with Zeebo that Victor just mentioned. So to begin with, yes. So let's think about what you guys know about the history of video games in Brazil. Of course, you know where Brazil is, right? Yes. Where Brazil is located? South America, right? Latin America, if you'd like. Of course, when we think about Brazil, in terms of games, we have a few ideas on, especially on the side of, let's say, representation of Brazil. Of course, it was very nice for me as a Brazilian kid to grow up knowing that this was the main Brazilian character that we had, right? Does anyone know this guy here? Blanca, right? So Street Fighter 2, this kind of green monster that lives in the Amazon. That was what Brazil was like for games. Of course, we have more recent representations. This is from Max Payne, for example, Max Payne 3 specifically, which is in São Paulo, which is my hometown, by the way. But of course, you can see that things are not completely right? So you can see, I don't think you can read it, but it says comida mexicana. So, not exactly very typical Brazilian. But of course, one of the things that are not very well known is that Brazil has a very rich and very particular gaming culture. Of course, we have a lot of piracy, and this will be one of the key themes for us to understand the history of games in Brazil, in Latin America, and in many parts of the world. But also have our own particular things. So, for example, I don't know if you ever saw this thing. So this is a version of Netflix in a disc for you to watch Netflix through PS2, through PlayStation 2. This is just to indicate, and this will be one of the key ideas behind Zeebo, and hopefully you understand when we get to there. PS2 was so massive in Brazil that was the easiest way for Netflix to get into Brazil through PS2. Even though Sony just came to Brazil during the PS3 era. So how does something like the PlayStation 1 or PlayStation 2 became so big in Brazil, even though Sony wasn't officially selling over there? And of course, nowadays in Brazil, we have a big culture of esports. So for example, this is the 2017, if I'm not wrong, Brazilian League of Legends final, which was played on my football club, Palmeiras stadium. So they closed a part of the stadium. More than 20,000 people watched that live. Right, so if we are thinking about Brazil and history, we need to start a little bit before. I know that you have a talk by Emanuel Ferreira, who is an amazing researcher from Brazil as well, and he talked a little bit about that. If you haven't watched, watch it. But just, I'll be very brief on that. So in Brazil, during the 80s, we started, like many parts of the world, with clones, right? So this is the Nintendo, the NES, right? The first NES. In Brazil, we have multiple versions of the NES, and they were all reverse engineered versions on that. So this, by the way, was my first video game, so a Phantom System, which used to run games from NES. But one of the things that far away from Brazil, most people don't know, is that we have a big, of course, we are close to the US, so US has a lot of influence, but we also have a very big Japanese community in Brazil, in São Paulo specifically, and in the south of Brazil. So there was a lot of contact with Japanese, especially from games. This version of NES here, the Dynacon, if you look at it, you see that it has 2 slots for cartridges. This is because one is for the Japanese version and another is for the US version. Because of course, at that time, you have locks, right? So you have region locks. So that was a way, so you could trade. For example, if I had an American version, Victor had a Japanese version, we could switch games and play around. Now, piracy is one of the key ideas to understand games in Brazil and a lot of things about the Brazilian culture. The second term that I want you to know is a very Brazilian term. I don't know if you have ever heard about it before, which is gambiarra. It's a slang for something that's done. It's kind of a manha, okay? So it's kind of doing, in English, I think the best translation would be kludge. It's when you find a solution for something through whatever you had at your hand, okay? So for example, one of the things that was very popular in Brazil at that time was this adapter here. So you could convert Japanese to American and the other way around. So you could play both games at the same time. Yes, just a reminder for that. Now, I'm talking about Nintendo, right? So that was the problem with Nintendo, didn't have an official distribution. Now, if we look at the whole idea about console wars and when they started, if you look at the US at this era, you see that Nintendo was massive and Sega missed the train in the US. They got there too late and they had around 4% of the market in the US during the Master System era. Now, of course, you learn with your mistakes, right? Or you should learn with your mistakes. So Sega said, okay, we cannot let that happen anymore. The way they found to not let that happen anymore was by partnering with local companies. And that's why when you look at Sega in Brazil, you have the official consoles being sold. So for example, you have the Master System. This is a version published by Tectoy at the time. So that made Sega to take a big chunk of the Brazilian markets. And you have a proper console war in Brazil, okay? It's not just because you have official distribution through Tectoy that Sega is going to control the market. You still have a big presence of Nintendo over there, but it's more, let's say, balanced in that sense. Tectoy, just to give a context, before it just did toys, okay? So who get this? Like, this is a very big product at the time. I'm talking about late 1980s, okay? So Tectoy and Sega, they are, one of the things that's quite interesting here is that they are going to become partners, like proper partners. Usually when you look at the history of games in other parts of the world, you have a more unbalanced relationship. So you have the company from the US or from Japan doing most of the work, and the other company just distributes it. Tectoy and Sega, of course, there is an unbalance, but there are some let's say, collaborations in that sense. So Tectoy starts with making hardware, okay? So hardware is the first thing that they are going to make, but one of the things that they are going to realize very quickly is that we cannot just take that hardware from Japan and sell it here. We have to give a kind of a Brazilian flavor to it. That starts with marketing. So they start making targeted ads. They partner with local IPs in Brazil that were very popular. So for example, that's super Brazilian. I'm sorry for the context, it doesn't matter much for you guys, but Monica is our main cartoon, like the main comic, let's say. So if you are a kid, you know you get literacy by reading Monica's gang's HQs. So it was a big way of trying to get to this kind of child's market. But more interesting, Tectoy starts pitching games to Sega, right? So, for example, you have a game like Ayrton Senna's Super Monaco GP. If you know Formula One, Ayrton Senna was a Brazilian racer, quite famous at the time. And Tectoy came to Sega and said, hey, what if we do a racing game about Ayrton Senna? First, they wanted to make themselves. Sega said, no, you're going to mess that up. So let us do it. And it became a big success. Tectoy didn't, you know, they also wanted to develop their own games. So you have this kind of porting and slash localization slash, I don't know, even know how to call that. So Monica, for example, again, showing up here, they just got a game that already existed, Wonder Boy. And they just changed all the assets and changed everything to depict Monica. So it was kind of a porting slash localization in that sense. And Tectoy also, during the 90s, they were also producing games for the local market. So with things that were just popular in Brazil, like Chapulín Colorado, which is a very famous Mexican character that was also very big in Brazil, and Pica-Pau, which for some reason was also very popular in Brazil. So Tectoy was working alongside with Sega doing that. Nintendo was already in Brazil at that time. They were trying to copy Tectoy, but just to give a sense of the difference, this is a Nintendo version sold in Brazil, which is very different from the Spanish one, right? That's because in Brazil, Nintendo did that via US. So you see the dynamics of play here. So you have a direct relationship with Tectoy and Sega, so Brazil, Japan. With Nintendo, it's still Brazil, Japan, but via US. So you can see that there it's more difficult and longer, the collaboration. Now, I have a short video, and this will just show, this is to celebrate the 30 years of partnership between Tectoy and Sega. This video is from 2017, and I want you to pay attention to one thing, okay? So look at when the most examples are from in terms of time, because this will kind of give a hint of what happens later and what where the problem starts to brew. Let's see if this sound is working. Is it? Oh. Technical issues. The video is very bad, okay? It's very marketing.
2017. Não marca apenas o relançamento do Mega Drive no Brasil, mas também a comemoração dos 30 anos da Tectoy. Uma longa história.
Okay. Yep. Right. So first, I apologize. This is it's a very bad speaker and has a very strong accent from the Rio region, which for me, as a person from São Paulo, is like. But if you notice, when they are talking about the main achievements from Tectoy, you notice that that's usually from the early days, right? So if you think about when the time span when Sega lived as a as a main developer, as a main not only as a publisher, you see that everything is like mid 90s before. There's a lot of references to Mega Drive and Master System, and there's one to Saturn, one to Dreamcast, right? So it kind of shows how it's very specific in time. And some of the main things that they also mentioned as a big achievements are things that are not very exciting if you think globally, right? So for example, they talk with a lot of proudness about porting Street Fighter 2 to the Master System, which is like, okay, guys, that's nice, but come on, we've moved on from that, right? So if you just look at this, it gives a sense that Brazil is stopped in time. It's always adopting things after everyone has already moved on. So we are kind of taking the scraps from gaming, if we think about that. No, not again, not again. Okay. Now, another key thing to understand this and how that is a way of understanding, yes, that you can think about Brazil and most of Latin America like that, but there are other ways that we have to bear in mind here. So, and to understand that, we need to think a little bit about geography and economic dynamics, okay? So sorry for that. I know we are here to learn about games, but we have to do that. Now, this is, okay, geography test, okay? Can anyone tell me what is this? It is a river, but not the Amazon. It is a little bit to the south. So this is the Puente de la Amistad. This is what links Brazil and Paraguay. And why the hell am I talking about Paraguay? To understand that, we need to think about dynamics, okay? So Paraguay is one of the only countries, I think they have switched sides, but in the 90s, they were one of the only countries that recognized Taiwan as the single China. There's one thing that's recognized as one China policy. So if you recognize China, you don't have relationship with Taiwan. If you recognize Taiwan, you don't have relationship with China. Now, Paraguay was one of the only countries in the world who recognized Taiwan. That meant that every cheap crap that Taiwan produced, they sold like peanuts for Paraguay, which means that Paraguay was the place where everyone in Latin America would go to buy cheap electronics. This means that through this bridge, you have access to a third way of getting into gaming, which was the unofficial way, let's say. And that was not only where we got our pirated version of things, but also other ways of dealing with games, okay? So things that were two very typical products from Brazilian 90s, okay? One is this idea about the Street Fighter de Rodoviária, which is Street Fighter from the bus station. Taiwan started doing this kind of weird mods of Street Fighter and selling them in cheap arcades that became a plague and kind of a fever in Brazil. Another thing that was quite common, especially because, of course, football, right? Brazil, South America in general. So people started doing mods of International Superstar Soccer and FIFA, putting the local teams and local players You can see here one of the main, that was a big hit in Brazil. Unofficially speaking, it became kind of the third best sold game, but of course we don't have official numbers to claim that. That's just, you know, in word of mouth if you ask people who used to work with games. Which was a version of Ronaldinho Soccer. You can see that it's the old Ronaldo, not Ronaldinho Gaúcho. But it was a version of International Superstar Soccer with Brazilian teams and a few teams of Latin America. I'm talking about this because home brewing became, it was from that time that home brewing became a big thing in Brazil. So we tend to joke that in Brazil there are only two things that work, because, you know, we are a mess. And one of these things is Bomba Patch, which is a group of guys who are still making nowadays mods for Pro Evolution Soccer for the PS2. And one of the things is that they make everything that happens in Brazil, they will put into the game. So it doesn't need to be necessarily related to football, but it's kind of a social commentary, which is a quite interesting thing to think about, how this connection between home brewing, piracy, culture happens. If you are academically interested in that, there's some work by another Brazilian called Thiago Falcão, who discusses this and who interviewed these guys. And if you are interested in understanding piracy and the history of games in Brazil, I highly recommend this documentary. It's quite short, so it's 3 episodes, and it takes a look at 3 ages of Brazilian game development and the relationship between with piracy. The name is Paralelos, because paralelo is the, let's say, the euphemistic way to talk about pirate games. Okay, so usually when we went to a shop to try to buy a game, the guy who, or the girl who was selling to you would ask you, do you want the official one or the paralelo? And the paralelo is the pirated version, which would be cheaper. So I highly recommend if you are interested in that. And they talk with people who worked in the industry. They talk to with current game developers. But the key point here for you to understand is that even though Sega was in Brazil officially, if you wanted to play Nintendo, or as we're gonna see, the PlayStation, there was no way of playing it officially, right? So especially the PlayStation, you either don't play or you play the pirated version. There's no other way. So it becomes something that's endemic to Brazil, and you know, you start thinking, is this really a problem? Like, if they don't want to sell it to me, why shouldn't I just, you know, buy the pirated version? Why shouldn't I just trade it? So it's another way of looking at this. And this is my main point on my research. This is my main argument, okay? One of the key ideas when I'm talking about looking at the history of games in Brazil through decolonial lenses. And decolonial in this sense would mean thinking about it from multiple perspectives, okay? Not just from the perspective of the company, which is what we usually see, right? Because if we think about it, in one hand, Brazil is a dependent periphery, right? So we don't have local production. We depend on someone somewhere develop a game and come to sell to us. Or we depend on someone somewhere to develop a game and someone else to pirate and bring it to us. On the other hand, if we look about how we played games, it is culturally rich because there is a local culture about playing games, be it by pirating games, be it by going to what we used to call locadoras. It's kind of a, well, locadoras would be, a blockbuster would be a locadora, okay? So just to translate. And in these locadoras, you'd have the consoles there. So instead of renting and having to play at your home, you could just rent and play there. So you don't even need to purchase the console. You can pay like 50 cents and spend a whole afternoon playing how many games you'd like. You have what we call para industries as well, so magazines that will sell this idea about, you know, what are the most recent games, what are the best games, and what are not, which is quite common to other parts of the world, right? So if you think about the US, you think about here, you always have this kind of para industries. And we have different ways of playing as well. So for example, it's much more common to play, even if it's a single player game, you would play it collectively, right? So everyone would go to a house, to someone's house, and we would just take turns playing a single player game, because that's just how we play. So we have these two things, and it depends on how you look at it. If you look at the official numbers, there's no gaming in Brazil. If you look under a microscope and on people's lives, there's a lot of gaming going on. Right, so let's move forward a little bit. So let's think about late 90s and early 2000s, and this happens, okay? The PlayStation arrives in Brazil. And the PlayStation is different because, of course, the media that it uses are CDs, right? So it's much easier to copy a CD than to copy a cartridge. So that will even make it even easier for our unofficial or parallel modes of distribution to get solid, to get strength. Because of course, now I don't need to, you know, for someone somewhere to buy, you know, this kind of plates and do all the soldering and so on. I can just, you know, I just need a computer, a drive to burn CDs, and that's it. And then this is the time when piracy will explode in Brazil. Okay, so this is the time when you are going to get gaming. It was already popular, but this is the time when gaming is going to become mainstream. Even though officially the numbers, the selling numbers are still not that great. If you look at companies' budgets, for example. At the same time, if we look globally, Sega is taking a hit, right? So Sega, the Saturn didn't do well. The Dreamcast was ahead of its time, some people say. So in 2001, Sega ceases to develop consoles, right? And that was a big hit for Tectoy, because of course, Tectoy was completely reliant on Sega in that sense. That's also why on the video, we don't see many references to this era. It's because it wasn't that great for us. So this means Tectoy starts looking elsewhere, okay? Tectoy starts, they think, okay, we cannot survive anymore on games. And they start looking elsewhere. Mid-2000s, PS2 piracy, okay? So if anyone asks about what was going on in Brazil, pirates playing PS2, okay? That's the thing about mid-2000s and gaming in Brazil. Now, Tectoy started to try to diversify what they were doing, okay? And they already had some expertise with other, well, you saw that they had the, you know, the factories there. So they had a lot of expertise with electronics, but they also had a lot of expertise with portings. If you remember as well, they were talking a lot about porting games to Master System, to Mega Drive, and so on. So one of the things they realized is that they could start porting games for Brazil and for the whole of Latin America to mobile phones, okay? Because that was one thing that at the time was safe. And why that was safer in that way? Because, so just to say, I'm not talking about smartphones, okay? I'm talking about these feature phones. So these were the kinds of games that I'm talking about, okay? By the way, these are all games that when I was working at Tectoy, I tested. So you can imagine testing Dance Dance Revolution Mobile for 1 month. It wasn't great. But anyway, why that was safer? Because the only way of getting these games is through a carrier, right? So you don't have a way of distributing these games. It's not a game that you can go, you know, to the corner and buy in a CD. You depend to go into an official website from your carrier and download from there. So you have to pay. So that was a safe mode of distribution. So you could just, you know, you were sure that these would be much more difficult to pirate. And let's be frank, who are going to want to pirate these games, right? If it's too much trouble, you're not going to go through that route. You just go to the corner and buy you know, three PS2 games for 10 reais, which is at the time probably €2. And this is where Zeebo comes from, okay? So Tectoy had all that expertise with mobile phones and with portings. We were porting games, so we would take the build from Konami. They were very good in maintaining the relationships with the publishers. So Sega, Konami, Data East, Disney at the time. So they were already porting these, and they knew that system distributing through carriers, through mobile phone networks, was a safe way of doing. So the idea was genius, right? What if we put a cell phone into a console, and that's the console, okay? And that's where how the Zeebo is born. So the Zeebo was basically a console that was developed to be 100% online 3G distribution. When you bought your Zeebo, you didn't know that, but it came with its own 3G SIM card, and you were already like 100% of the time connected to this separate network, which was called ZeeboNet at the time. And that was how you could download your games. That was the only way of having your Zeebo games downloaded and bought. Of course, they knew that if they were doing something that was based on a mobile phone, it wouldn't be super great. So, and of course, the way was a kind of a trade-off between piracy and power. Okay, computational power, let's say. So it was a trade-off, and they started thinking, okay, where can we try to sell this? Where piracy is a problem, where official distribution is a problem, and where can we sell this? So that's why Brazil was the first place in the world and the place where it was designed to, but there were plans on selling it to Mexico, China, India, all countries are more or less in the same situation, right? So a lot of piracy, not a lot of official distribution, and so on. Oh, starting 5 minutes. And Zeebo was launched in Brazil and in Mexico, just to say. To do that, Tectoy needed another partner, and they partnered with Qualcomm, which, differently from Sega, it's a hardware. Well, at the time, Sega was also hardware manufacturer, but Qualcomm just do hardware. Okay, so if you know Qualcomm, if you don't know, they do a lot of GPUs, and they used to do a lot of things for cell phones as well at the time, and they still do. And this is what the Zeebo looked like. So you can see, unfortunately, I don't have a Zeebo to show it to you, but it's super light. It's not that big. It's kind of this size, more or less. So smaller than A4 paper. And it's super light because there's nothing there, right? So it's basically a cell phone in a plastic box. One of the key things was it also, remember, this is around 2008, 2007, 2008. So this was at the same time that we have PS3, Xbox, the first Xbox, and Wii. they were not aiming at these consoles, even though if you think about in terms of times and timelines and generations, we could put in the same generation. It's not. This is supposed to compete with PS2, which was still a massive thing in Brazil, even though, so imagine 2008, we're talking about PS3 already. PS3 is not even a massive new thing, but PS2 is still king in Brazil at that time. So this was supposed to be an alternative to PS2 if you don't want to purchase pirated things. If you want to purchase something that's official and you want to play your games, games from big publishers like Konami, for example, Zeebo will provide you that. So you don't need to go to these places just to buy the pirated version. Now, the thing is, in this partnership, when Tectoy was aiming at that, they were aiming at one particular chipset, which was the Snapdragon. And the Snapdragon, if you are into mobile or you like looking at hardware, the Snapdragon still exists, and it's still one of the most powerful GPUs for mobile phones that you can have. Now the thing is, Qualcomm didn't made the Snapdragon in time, and they forced Tectoy to go to the market with the Zeebo in the original timeline. So everything that was planned for the Snapdragon, but they didn't get the Snapdragon. They got a chipset that was the same chipset as the HTC Diamond, which, by the way, was one of the, remember when I showed you the Java games that I mentioned I tested? We used to have the HTC Diamond to test, and it was already crap as a mobile phone. So you can imagine buying a console that has that chipset to be your main console to compete against the PS2. So that was one of the key issues there. It was already, it was banking too much on the idea that Brazilians would prefer to have something official, because there's no official distribution. So why don't, maybe that's what we need to give to them. But of course the chipset was crap. I'm going to show you a 30 seconds video. This is the ad for the Zeebo launch, okay? So I want you to pay attention to, imagine that you are watching this on TV, okay? In 2008, go a little bit back in time, and that you're thinking about buying a console. So think about who is the target audience for this video. So if you look at it, you can see that the target audience is your expected target audience, right? So young males, but it's very gamey-like, right? So there's a lot of action. You show a racing game, this whole idea of a mass, football players running. So it's quite gamey, if you'd like, right? The pitch of how the console, who is the target audience for the console. Now, of course, imagine you watch this because that was what was promised to you. And then you started to play, and then, of course, it's not exactly there. So did the Zeebo work? No. So this was the kind of quality that you had, okay? So you had, this is just the UI of how it looks like, so you can have an idea of what it looks like. You had a lot of portings from old games, like arcade games. I think this is Street Hoop, which is a game from, like an arcade game from late 80s. One of the key games was Quake 2. If you know, Quake 2 is from 1996, I think. 6 or 8, I always get mistake. But of course, 10 years older than it was launched. This is the porting of Resident Evil 4, which is, we're going to talk a little bit about the Zeebo Afterlife, and Resident Evil 4 has a big role on that. And these, we didn't do just portings. We also had a few local made games, and most of the games were kind of party games that you could play. If you saw on the ad, one of the players was playing like this. It was because, of course, it was the Wii era, so you know everyone wants motion control. So this was a sports game called Peteca, which is kind of it's an indigenous game from Brazil, but it's basically a badminton without a racket, and you were supposed to play with the boomerang, like you would play Wii Sports, for example, Wii Tennis. To give a better sense, I'm going to play a short gameplay video of one of the games, just for you to see how crap it was, okay? And is just to prove that I was there. That was the picture of the team who worked on this, the whole picture. Unfortunately, I missed the photo. You can see that there's a gap here. That was where I was supposed to be, because I was doing a test at the uni, a test of Spanish. So, and you can see that's why I'm speaking in English now. Okay. And below you can see a photo of me with my team. I'm just gonna play. It's a short video to show the gameplay. Free gameplay. Okay, so this is exactly what you will see. Now, imagine that this is trying to compete with the PlayStation 2, right? So you could be playing God of War or this. What are you guys going to choose? This, of course, right? Yeah. So this is where you can see why it failed, right? So it kind of banks too much on the idea that people don't want to buy pirate things. People just want to buy official things, which of course is not necessarily the case, because pirating was the key way of accessing games for us for a long time. So it's not a dilemma, you just keep doing what you're already doing. I wanted you to, this is the last video that I'm going to show and I'm almost finishing, okay? So bear with me for just 5 more minutes. I asked you to have a look at the previous ad, Zeebo ad. That was the first Zeebo ad. This is the second and the last, okay? So pay attention on the difference on how it tried to become a different thing when they realized, when we realized, you know, this is never going to be able to compete with the PS2. Difference here in terms of the target audience. Kids, right? So you see much more, you know, it's a family thing. You are going to learn, you can access the internet, and the gaming is kind of, you know, something that you can do between you are, you know, doing your maths lessons or checking, I don't know, your emails. If kids have emails, I don't know. So you can see that how it tried to change the way it was pitched, because of course it couldn't be sold as a gaming device anymore. But even like that, it still didn't work because of course, you know, it wasn't that great. And then in 2011, officially, it stopped being produced. Now, more recently, we have, and this is part of the reason why I am here, and we, Victor and I are working together, not just because we are crazy people who like weird video games. Well, a little bit of that, but also because there is a growing interest in Zeebo in different ways. One of the key points is the idea of looking at history from the sense of this, you know, curiosity thing, especially if you are not used to the local cultures. I highly recommend this episode from Stop Skeletons from Fighting on Zeebo, because you look at it from you know, the main YouTuber's American's perspective, and he tries a lot to try to understand what it meant to have Zeebo from Brazil and so on. But it's looked more as a kind of a curiosity, like, oh, look how cute they are. They were trying to do something, you know. Another thing that's quite, and just to, because I mentioned that before, that kind of interest started because someone realized that there was a kind of a lost porting of Resident Evil 4 to Zeebo that has almost nothing to do with Resident Evil 4. I don't know if you played Resident Evil 4, which is a very long game, very, well, I quite like it in terms of the whole franchise. But if you play the Zeebo version, it has practically nothing to do with the main, you know, the source text, let's say. And then because of the way Zeebo is was developed, because of its conditions, one, even if you have a Zeebo, you cannot install games anymore because we don't have ZeeboNet unless you pirate it. So, you know, even the piracy thing didn't work that well. And we don't have an emulator. So you can only look, for most of us, you can only look at gameplay. And then this interest started growing in terms of, you know, I really want to play this game. And like, why was this game made for this weird Brazilian console? So internationally speaking, Resident Evil 4, the fact that it was a very successful game and had this particular version helped to, raise Zeebo's profile internationally. You also have been a lot of interest from collectors. So at the time when, because it was mobile phone device hardware, and because there were just so many, at the time when we were working, you'd have piles and piles of Zeebos there. You would use Zeebos to raise your desk just because you. And now this is what they are worth, like $1,500. I really regret that time. I could be rich. I would be not here and probably there on the beach, just relaxing. But this is another thing that's quite interesting to think about, how this idea of curiosity and something that's very rare in some ways can be used to exploit in terms of speculation. One thing that's quite super recent as well, Tectoy decided to do, I don't work for Tectoy anymore, just to say, since 2012. I left Tectoy in 2012, but exactly almost 1 month ago, they registered at the Brazilian INPE, is the Brazilian IP office. Okay, so where you register trademarks and so on. So they registered a new trademark, and it is registered as video game consoles. So there's a lot of interest, not a lot, because of course it's a very niche group, but there's a lot of interest within the community on what this new Tectoy thing is going to be. Is it going to be Zeebo 2? Is it going to be a new console? These are mock-ups that fans made with AI, so don't take these as real things. And that's the real logo. Okay, so that's official. But it is an interesting time to be talking about Zeebo and talking about these things as well. So this is my last slide. So thanks for bearing with me until now. So why am I interested and why do I research this? It's not only because I am attached to it because I worked on it and I am Brazilian and so on, but I think for all of us, for the whole world, what's most important is to think about, we tend to think that all the innovations, they come from specific places, right? So we tend to think about the innovations as, generating in the US, in Canada, in Japan. And the Zeebo is a very good counter example of that, right? So as far as I know, and as far as most of the people that I talked to agreed, this was the first console that implemented digital distribution as the only way of distributing games. Of course, you had a lot of things happening at the same time. So it's the same time that we had Ouya, for example, that was also digital only. But in that way that you don't even need to have internet at your home. You just need the console, and it's going to be you can get games digitally. That was quite innovative at the time. When every other console was still depending on physical media. So it's just to show how sometimes these innovative ideas, they emerge elsewhere. They emerge from parts of the world that we don't think about as innovative. And this is more for you to think about in terms of when you're trying to, as game developers, as people who are going to work with games. And this was, in my view, the main issue with Tectoy in that side. They miscalculated the idea of wanting official things had for the average Brazilian player, right? Because of course, if you look at the official numbers, it felt as if people didn't play games in Brazil. However, we Brazilians knew games, and we knew what's a good game, what's a crap game, what kinds of games we like, what we don't like, how to share and how to work in different ways. So you know, if you are releasing a product or releasing something in a particular place, you need to know that culture really well and think about how your product will interact with that culture. Because of course, if you are trying to sell crack games for Brazilians, even if that's the only official game that you can get, if you can get the pirated thing, and that's good, you just get a good product. It doesn't matter, you know. So it was one thing about not understanding the country where you were in, even though you were from that country, which is also an important point here. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much for your time. And if you have any kind of questions or anything, happy to answer them.